This episode of Reading Trek is brought to you by our patrons. You too can support this vibrant fan-based podcast network by visiting patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. For as little as $1 a month, patrons gain exclusive early access to some of our unedited shows, interviews, and even get to join in on exclusive patron-only chats. We have lots more Patreon content on the way that you won't want to miss, so visit patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions and be sure to mention that Reading Trek sent you. Put down the remote, set your phasers to stun, and pick up that comic book.
You do have books in the 24th century.
Welcome to episode 16 of Reading Trek, a Star Trek book club podcast and proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions podcast network. I am the host of Reading Trek, Marty Allee, and today I am joined by Shashank Avvaru, a famous name among the Tricorder tribe. How are you doing today, Shashank?
Namaste, Homo sapiens. I'm doing wonderful. Every time you say pick up that comic book, my heart just goes to warp drive. It's incredible. I am so glad we have an avenue on the network to talk about comic books, and you make that happen, Marty, so thank you.
I'm glad that you are a part of this as well. So,
I would like to think I badgered you into submitting and saying, you know what, we'll talk about comic books. We'll do
I
it.
actually always wanted to talk about the comic books, but we had the Drawing Trek series that was going on for a while, so I didn't want to step on their toes. But once we got that okay, full steam ahead. So
yeah. So how are you, Marty? It's been a while.
Doing well. It's been a while since I've recorded a Reading Trek. We had all the STLV craziness that happened, and I started school recently, so it hasn't left me a lot of free time, but I'm glad we're here. We're recording.
Yeah, I'm glad we're picking up those comic books and getting into it. For today's episode, we'll be talking about the Star Trek IDW Discovery comics, specifically Star Trek Light of Kahless and Star Trek Discovery Succession.
Wow, is that a book?
Yes. And for those who are new to the podcast, we are a book club podcast working our way through the Star Trek Expanded Universe, one novel or comic book at a time, discussing characters, plot, writing, and artwork, piecing it into the larger Trek universe as we pull out the meanings and messages of the text. Although we do encourage you to read along with us, the show was designed to give all Trek fans a way to journey through the EU together, even if you haven't read the books. Like Shashank mentioned, we are covering Star Trek Discovery, The Light of Kahless, number 1 through 4 by Kirsten Beyer and Mike Johnson, with art by Tony Shattin and J.D. Metler, and Star Trek Discovery Succession, number 1 through 4, written by Kirsten Beyer and Mike Johnson, with art by Angel Hernandez and Mark Roberts.
That's the book. I know it's a book. The book.
So, let's get started. We'll start with Discovery Light of Kahless, and I'll admit I have been a huge proponent of everything IDW. They have been doing incredible work. There is not one comic I picked up so far that I thought, you know what, this wasn't worth my $3.99. They make it worth your money. Every story they're telling adds something to the mythology. It gives you some new information. Like, even if you don't see anything from the Light of Kahless series, for example, there is one scene where T'Kuvma gets his armor, and you now know how T'Kuvma gets his armor.
Yes, there's a lot of little golden nuggets in that comic book. But
right.
Before we go full on into it, would you like to give listeners a little summary of Light of Kahless?
Absolutely. So is this where get to take over and say, black alert, black alert?
Black alert. Black alert.
Well, spoilers ahead, obviously, for Discovery in general, but the series itself, which is a 4-issue miniseries written by Kirsten Beyer and Mike Johnson and drawn by Tony Shattin. And Mike Johnson, we have talked about him a few times on this podcast. We're still hoping to get him on here at some point, but he's done the Star Trek Green Lantern crossover. That was him. And Tony Shattin, if I'm not wrong, was the artist there. So it's great to see him coming back. But it's the best summary I can give for Star Trek Discovery's Light of Kahless is we all, when we start Discovery, within the first 10 minutes, we see exactly where the Klingons are, and we see Takovma as the leader. This 4-issue miniseries shows us how he became that leader. That's what the story is. It's the Jesus Christ story of Takovma. It's what happens from when he was born. It literally starts at his birth. We get to see him from a very young age. And the premise of the story, the whole thing is being told in form of a story, in form of a myth being told to Vok from Laurel, while Vok is having... So to set up the scene, the book starts in the present timeline, I guess Discovery's present timeline, just as...
Between episodes 2 and 3, I believe, of Discovery.
The question isn't where we are. It's when we are.
And Vok is having doubts. He's thinking about how to lead the Empire, and he does not know what to do. And then Laurel comes in and goes, essentially calls him out on being a coward. And she says, why are you doubting yourself? What is going on? And he goes, well, I don't know if I'm as powerful as Kahless. And Laurel goes, okay, well, let me tell you a story of how Takovma, the man who you say taught you everything about Kahless and someone who you think was most like Kahless, how he became what he became and why you are his worthy successor. And that's when we jump off into the story. So the summary of this series is it's a 4-issue collection of tales that join together Takovma's life until we see him in episode 1. And it starts with Takovma's childhood, and we see how he is within his family and how he feels disconnected as one of the House of Girja, which is at the time a befallen house, a house that is not in the best possible shape in the Empire. And he is someone who's distant as a child, and they have a lot of children in his family, and he's bullied by his brothers. So he runs away from where they were playing with his brothers into the forest as a 10, 11-year-old in human years, probably. And he sees a giant ship, an incredible, ancient, beautiful ship, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is the ship that we see in Discovery that he's on.
Yeah, it's the sarcophagus ship that we see during the first half of.
And so we see him discover that ship, but it's all in ruins, and it's clearly something that looks like it has been covered up and taken over by Mother Nature for millennia. Anyway, he steps into it, and inside he finds his sister Zhula. And Zhula is getting the ship renovated. And there are a big bunch of people there, and she's talking to this group, and it looks like they're leading the renovation of the ship. And Takovma at this point has no idea what that ship even is. So she gets into the story of the ship, and she tells them there was a time when the Klingon Empire aspired to travel to the stars, and we got very close. The House of Girja got very close until while we were building the ship, our house fell, and we completely forgot about space travel. But what happens afterward was completely out of our control, and our families went where they went, and the Empire got separated into all the other houses. But meantime, secretly, we found this. We, the little ragtag group, found this, and we are in the process of rebuilding the ship. And Takovma asks, okay, why are you rebuilding the ship? And then she tells him the story of the light of Kahless. She tells him, up there in the stars, there is Kahless, who is our Jesus Christ, who is our God. And he's somewhere in the stars, and it is our destiny to go to him. And we believe by rebuilding the ship and going to the stars, you, as a Klingon, will finally actually become one with Kahless. We will see Kahless again, and he will guide us to a place of glory. And that's where the story begins. In summary, the remaining 3 issues take us from how Takovma hears the story as a child to how he goes through the crises that he goes through in life, all the while pursuing this goal to get to Kahless. He goes from this child to someone who becomes a monk and moves to Boreth, which is a planet where you become one of the Klingon monks. You essentially become an ascetic, and there he learns all about Kahless. And he tries to channel Kahless, and he ends up getting a supernatural connection that everybody convinces him is Kahless. And we go from seeing that to him reuniting all of the people of Klingon and all of the people of the Klingon Empire, and we see them going into a ship. We see a group of people, a subset of the Empire, who say, you know what, we are going to go into the ship that is now, over these decades, as he has grown up, completely built into a space travel-worthy ship. So a group follows Tukovma, and they sit in the ship, and they say, you know what, we are actually going to go out, and we're going to find that light of Kahless. And then the story goes forward to eventually getting to a point where they have traveled for God knows how long, and they don't see the light of Kahless. And ultimately, Tukovma is convinced by Kale, who's one of his friend's compatriots, one of the people who helped him build that ship. At the end, he convinces him, you know what, if we keep doing this, we will never actually see the light of Kahless, because, well, there is no other way to look at this but to think of this as you, Tukovma, you being the light of Kahless. You are that beacon who reunited the houses that are on the ship now, and we are now back to actually having space travel. And so he takes him into a room where he shows him what he calls the beacon, the light of Kahless, which is the spacecraft, a spacecraft that they've built that takes them out and allows them to engage in battle. And anyway, Tukovma again is exactly where Vok is in his headspace. And he goes, wait, that's again, so we are lying to people? And then he goes, no, go back to the story and you'll see that over the decades, you are the one who brought all our people together. So ultimately, the story that starts out as a young child looking for a light, a beacon of a god, ends with the adult him realizing that he is that light, and he was the person who had to bring all these people together all along. Like a light would, it would bring you to it. And it ends where the Klingon ship, the sarcophagus ship, picks up a signal from the Federation. So right before, I'm guessing a few days before where episode 1 starts. So that's I think is a summary. Did I miss out on anything important, Marty?
No, I think you got it. That was a good summary. Good job.
Thanks, man.
Let's dive into it.
Let's do it.
I like this comic book a lot. I liked that it was a deep dive into the Discovery era Klingon culture.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't have as much like whiz whiz bang bang that you'd expect from a comic book. It was kind of just this very thoughtful like character piece on Tukovma, which I thought was fantastic. What did you think overall?
It's not a traditional comic book.
No.
A traditional comic book has people fighting, going to ships, and like blasting things out of the
Whiz whiz bang bang.
Yeah, and they substitute that. Bayer and Johnson and Chastain, they substituted for something incredible. I think something truly breathtaking. They take us into the imagery, the minutiae of how this Klingon empire is run. Like at one point, we see Jula, Tukovma's sister, give birth.
Yes.
And we see what a Klingon birth looks like.
Yes.
So they've traded in things like the Klingon bird of prey, or what would eventually become a bird of prey, because that's what it looks like to me. It's like an early version of a bird of prey. So they substitute that with showing intricate, incredible, moving things like a Klingon birth, or deeper into the sarcophagi. I'm going to have trouble with this word for sure. Sarcophagi. We actually go into, there is a scene where somebody is making a sarcophagus and he's getting yelled at.
And then we find out the reason why that ship is covered in sarcophagi to begin with.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful story. It's in a way, it's like something I do. Like at my home, I have a flag of my homeland. I have an Indian flag at my house. And every time I look at it and go, you know what? This is a part of my heritage. This is where I come from. And you find out that in light of Kahless, the sarcophagi exist on that ship because Tukovma and Kale, the craftsman of the ship, both decide to take them along on their journey because that is their heritage and that is where they came from, and they want to make their ancestors proud. So really little to no action. All the action is like the ones that we even see is hand to hand, sword to sword.
Right.
There are really only 4 or 5 fights in the entire thing. It's Takuma getting bullied by his sisters, by his brothers comes to mind. And then Takuma training comes to mind on the ship as a child. Then Takuma and Jula, that fight comes to mind. But there is really no the fights and the traditional. We need to go get that thing is substituted for a myth. That's what I think this is. It's a true myth in the form of the word.
So there's one scene in the comic book that I wanted to touch on.
Okay.
When Takuma's sister gives birth, she gives birth to an albino Klingon, which is hinted at that it might be Vogue.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Well, here's the thing. We never actually see that so what happens immediately after the scene is Jula's husband is told that the albino Klingon was killed.
Right. But then also later on, we find out that he was found somewhere,
right,
and picked up by this family who took him in. And I'm just like, oh, that's like a pretty big like clue in that that Vogue might actually be related.
Yeah.
Kuma.
Yeah. And I'm like I would be very surprised if that doesn't end up becoming part of the story. The good thing that these and see, the only reason you and I know this, and it'll be something that won't hit us with as much surprise, because we'll already have read the miniseries. And now we know a little bit more than someone who'd watched the traditional.
Exactly.
And
so now if that comes up on Discovery,
right,
we'll be like, oh, well, we knew that like way back when we read Light of Kahless.
Right. And we'll actually, when we get into the second half of this episode, when we get into Succession, like we will know who the emperor is of the mirrored universe right now.
Yeah.
So coming back to Light of Kahless, though, yes, that's a really good point. There are all kinds of Easter eggs in there. And just speaking of scenes, what do you have? Did you have a favorite scene?
In issue 2, I like the scene where Takuma is in the caves of Nomat.
Oh my God, dude. No kidding. That is my favorite scene also.
So beautiful. So cool. Just like the fact that they have to sit, basically, if you haven't seen it, it's a giant cave with the floor is lava.
Yeah.
Literally. And there's these big stone pillars that they put Klingons on. They sit there naked with no food, no water. And if you pull yourself out early, then you're not going to make it as a monk.
And while they observe all these students at Boreth who have gone to become these monks, you see these children, and the teachers are talking about how nobody has even survived long enough. And what the rumor is that if you sit there long enough in the midst of this lava and you meditate upon Kahless, that Kahless will come to you. That's the story that's told to these kids is you meditate long enough, Kahless will come to you. And you see all these kids, and one by one they drop until again, one of my favorite panels in the series is it drops to the very end, the last panel, where it's just Takuma sitting, and then there is a single dialogue bubble that says only one remains. And just it's the way it's drawn, the way we see Takuma with his resolve on, I am going to see Kahless. It's so hypnotic. It evokes images of Buddha. Like that's what he looks like to me, is Buddha trying to get into that transcendence. And just that's my favorite scene also. So that worked out great. And that was because the lighting is so beautiful, and all
it's
the lighting
really well done. The lighting in the comic book is incredible. There's even like a few pages later when they're in the mountain, and the lighting changes to reflect the like brightness of the snow and all that stuff.
And like speaking of lighting, the book with the scenes takes you to a lot of dark places, and I don't mean mentally dark. I mean literally dark, like crypts. Yeah. You go into crypts and broken down ships and lightless buildings, and the way they light it up is so beautiful. And
the best one I found is in issue 1 when Takuma discovers the sarcophagus ship, and he's standing he walks in and he sees his sister standing on the bridge of the ship, and there's just this light that pours in
Yeah.
from
And
the.
To complement that, I liked the one that followed a couple of scenes after, which is where we see them in the crypt and they're drawing the sarcophagi for the first time. And Kale is getting yelled at when they're in the crypt, and it's just a panel with an establishing shot, and you see all the sarcophagi on the side, and it's zooming into it, and it's so well lit, so intricate. And I believe I saw a few tweets from Tony Shasteen, the artist, who said he basically had free reign over some of the things, like drawing a Klingon birth, something that we never saw in the mythology.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he said, I had the opportunity to like imagine what a Klingon birth would be like. And the best way I can describe it is like, it's almost like, for those who haven't read it, first off, what are you doing? Stop listening to this. Just go read it. It's beautiful. But just to put it into imagery, it's like a really weird fitness machine. It's like two big pillars. So the Klingon female stands or crouches a little bit, and there are two big pillars that are put that almost capture her in from the side, and there are bars on which she holds on to, and she just gives birth. And there is something so ancient and very barbarian about that kind of birth, which again relates to that whole Klingon mythology. But so the lighting's great, the imagery is great, and obviously, would you agree that the art is beautiful and very well?
The art is incredible. The colors are incredible. I love the earthy tones when they're on Kronos and on the I forget the name of that planet, but when they're on the ground,
Yeah.
it's very earthy tones, and then when they're in space, they brighten up the colors a lot.
Yeah. And the way the ship looks, the sarcophagus ship, from its start to it flying up, just incredible. And there are, like I said, I was mentioning this earlier, there is a scene in which, so the lighting is set up so well, and you don't get this until the very end, but close to the end when Takovma takes charge of the ship and they're ready to go into space. Before they get up there, Kale brings him the armor that we see him wear in episode 1. And because everything's so dark and not as well lit, you actually see that armor like it's a beautiful gem, like a ruby. And then he puts it on, and then you go, oh, that's the Takovma, I know. And just the art is great. What did you think about the writing?
I did not think that, especially the scenes with Laurel and Vogue, I didn't think that it was, I didn't get that that's how Klingons would talk to each other. It was a little Americanized for my taste.
Right.
I know it was all like translated from Klingon to English, but.
And I appreciated that. Like every first panel, every time they break a dialogue, there is an asterisk in each issue, and it goes translated from Klingon. So that's good. But so you had some issue with the way,
just the way they spoke to each other. It didn't feel Klingon.
Yeah.
It felt like two humans talking to each other. I wanted a little more like anger, and I don't know. Maybe it was just me.
And isn't it interesting that this is probably the only time we'll actually see like a real extended conversation between Vogue and Laurel, because the next time we see them, it's Tyler and Laurel.
Right. It just reminded me of like Chancellor Gowron from Deep Space Nine, like talking. All the Federation wants to do is talk, and it's like, well, that's what they're doing here in this comic book. So,
well, if I'm not trying to defend the setup, but I think if you read classic myths like Hindu myths and Greek myths, a lot of the stories are told as being told between one character to another.
Okay.
So it's like for example, the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu myth, comes from a warrior sitting about to go battle his entire family and breaking down because he doubts everything about himself, and he goes, why should I kill my family? That just does not make sense to me. And his charioteer, who is the greatest god in the universe in the form of a human, turns into God himself, and he becomes the universe, and he goes, you don't understand the world. Let me tell you about the world. And he says out the Bhagavad Gita. And that's like how all the other myths, like I believe, if I'm not wrong, Odyssey is a conversation between two people. Iliad might be a conversation between two people. So I think that is what they were trying to emulate. And I appreciate that they went that deep into where they wanted the myths to be so reminiscent of classic myth that it made sense to me. But I can see your point. I understand. But apart from that, did you enjoy the writing? Did you have any glaring issues?
And now that I understand like the point of view they're coming from, I kind of appreciate that a little bit more. But as far as like the actual like Takuma finding his way, I loved all of that stuff. I especially liked that the beacon that they're searching for the whole comic book, it really doesn't, like, they can't find it. No one's ever found it.
Right.
So he's like, you know what? I'm just going to make it myself.
Yeah, and that's it's weird that it evokes like all religions. Like you say, I'm looking for God, but you probably will never see God when you're alive. So you're making it up as you go. And the way they turn that into, Takuma, you are the beacon, and you need to realize that. And the fact that he had a glow and he was glowing and he had a specific, did you notice that after his volcano incident, once he said, I see the light, he starts glowing, like there's a red aura around him. And and like that reminds me of, he was the beacon. And I think next time I read it, that's just intelligent subtlety that you catch on as you read it over and over. But I love the journey story. You know what? I'll admit, now if I go back and watch the pilot, I don't think I'll see Takuma as the real big bad guy.
No, it adds a whole layer, many layers to his character, and it makes you appreciate what he's actually trying to do at the Battle of the Binary Stars. So it's really well written in that way.
And that's why people should go out and buy these books, is because you get that new kind of storytelling. And you would never get that if you were like, you know what, comics are dumb, I'm not going to read comics. But I said, what was your, do you have a favorite panel?
Well, again, the scene with the lava pit was one of my favorites. We talked about the light shining through on the ship of the dead.
Right.
And I also liked in issue 3 where Takuma is just looking out into this endless space.
Yeah.
You see him standing there. Almost looks like he's standing in space, because you just see like asteroids and stars all around him, making him again like glow. And I thought it was really well drawn.
Oh yeah, I see that. That's beautiful. One thing though, I don't think there was any there wasn't a whole lot of creative panel risk taking in this series like there was with Mirror Broken. Remember Mirror Broken, the Picard maneuver, like where the ship turns and shoots everything at once?
Oh yeah.
Like I didn't find any particular, you know what, that's really creative. Like a lot of the angles and a lot of the ways the perspectives were shown did not seem particularly creative, but they didn't need to, because the imagery is so beautiful, and where they set it up is so good that that would actually be too much. Like that would be, you don't need.
And I think this is more focused on the story rather than the art.
Oh, like, yeah. And I think Tony knows that when he's telling the story, the best thing he can do is like make it simple, make it grand. You see a lot of people standing in open, big spaces. You see a lot of people pontificating. You see a lot of people arguing and deciding what they want to do and learning things. And that's what myths are. That's what they're like. But if I were to choose my favorite panel, apart from the one where it zooms down to him sitting like Buddha and it says only one remains, I still can't just the imagery of that Klingon birth is just so burned in my memory now.
Really good, yeah.
It's and like the way they showed it, and you don't expect it, so when you see it, it's what just happened. And but a lot of really good twists and turns. I wanted to keep reading the story. At no point was I like, this is just dragging along, let me go to issue 3. And I think one good thing, I don't know if you've read a lot of comics, Marty, but some comic writers, what they'll do is they'll try to fill up a page with a bunch of panels. Like typically, if you go over 6 panels, it starts looking like it's getting crowded.
Yeah.
Like I'll give you an example. There is a writer named Scott Snyder, and he's very popular for his Batman run from 2011 to 2014 or 15. And he's a millionaire now because his comics sold really, really well. But one thing that he did is, and he still does it, he tries his best not to, but when he started out, he used to fill up every page with 8 panels. So it would be like, it would almost be laborious to follow the story. What I appreciate from Mike Johnson and Kirsten Beyer, and Johnson particularly because I've noticed it in Boldly Go and the crossover with Green Lantern, is he never fills up a page. He leaves it to 3, 4, 5 panels. Just let the place breathe. And I also appreciate the architecture, like the Klingon architecture that you get to see, from the ships to the buildings to like the volcano caves to the sarcophagi. And I don't know how much detail went into it. I don't know who's to credit for that, but go ahead.
The stuff on Kronos especially reminded me of the map paintings we see throughout TNG and DS9.
Yeah.
You see that shot of like the pyramids and the tower in the back.
One thing we haven't talked about is we actually see the first, I'm assuming this is the first, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the first Klingon cloaking. Like as they discover, toward the end of the series, they discover that the ship can cloak. That would technically be the first, because this is the first anything in the Star Trek franchise.
I'm still looking for the explanation on how they got that cloaking technology to begin with.
I'm sure there is going to be Star Trek.
I know it's like a lot of people say it got stolen from the Romulans a long time ago. And I'm like, I'm looking for a novel or a comic book that tells that story.
But did you like, apart from the whole setup of it, favorite panels and stuff aside, did you enjoy that it was just 4 issues, or did you want more of it? Did you think that it was perfect, or did you find it was too short?
I thought 4 issues was a good length for this series. I think they told the story they wanted to tell. I could have maybe done one more issue, make it a 5-issue run, and have an issue devoted entirely to what T'Kuvma was doing to become a monk. Like a few more of those kind of adventures.
Right, because we really only see 2. We see the volcano and then the snow.
And you know that there's more to it than that.
So. Oh yeah, I'm sure they should have done. That's right. That would have been a really good T'Kuvma issue. It's the whole story is T'Kuvma's anyway, but. Right. I also am sure, I don't know if you felt this way, but I could have used an issue to learn more about what happens to Jula.
Yeah.
Because you see her pouting at the end, and she's clearly not happy with how things have ended with T'Kuvma saying we are no longer brother and sister. I wanted to see what happens after, but I think they're saving that for the actual show. I'm sure we'll see an actual Jula at some point.
They're either saving it for the actual show, or we'll get another comic series when season 2 is over.
Yeah,
stuff like that. Because it's great that we're getting all this bonus material while the show is airing, but there's also like it could easily be overridden by something the show does. So they don't want to tell too much at once.
But. So good tight story. I think that I do appreciate that they told it in 4 with this and Succession. It's a really good. For the first time I read a Star Trek comic, I was so engrossed in the story. At no point, I think if you're reading it from cover to cover, do you realize that you're reading a Star Trek story without any Federation, Starfleet, Starship.
With the exception of the beacon, the Federation like listening post that they put in there, like no Federation presence at all in that one.
Yeah, nobody in a uniform, nobody saying technobabble, just really good Klingon storytelling. And people keep giving like undeserved crap to the Klingons of Discovery, while they just keep kicking ass with good storytelling.
The Klingons in Discovery have a great storyline, and just because they don't have hair does not make them any less Klingon than the rest of the series is.
And what, I don't know why they get that. I don't know. Their production value is better in the show with stories like The Light of Kahless, and to an extent there is a Klingon storyline in Succession. They keep adding to the richness of the story.
No, I agree with you, but I think a lot of it has to do with people who are afraid that they're going to erase over what they loved about Star Trek growing up.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to respect everything that came before it. It might look a little different, but if you follow the storyline versus the look of the thing, like it all lines up. So,
Marty, if this book costed 10 pieces of latinum, how much would you pay for it? That will be a new rating system, listeners. If it's a 10 on 10, it's a really good book, and from there.
I don't know about. I would pay 5 slips of latinum for each issue, and maybe one or two strips.
So that's like a really good big cash collection for the Ferengi.
I don't know how the Ferengi money converts, but
Okay. Okay, well, out of a 5-star, an overall 5-star, how much would you give it?
I definitely give this a 4 out of 5. Yeah.
It's really good. I would probably give it a little more. I would do 4.25. I enjoyed it. I loved everything about it. Nothing felt wasted. At no point did I feel like they were dragging the story to make money with me. So I appreciated the whole setup. And
it's a great little side story. Great insight into the pilot of Discovery.
And just, I'm sure everything we've read here will at some point factor into like the remainder of Discovery.
Absolutely.
So, in short, I guess we both recommend it. Go pick it up. It's a wonderful comic book, and remain Klingon.
And now we're going to move on to Star Trek Discovery Succession, issues 1 through 4.
I wasn't aware you indulged in the literature of fantasy.
Light reading is considered relaxing, Captain.
Which had a little more whiz whiz bang bang than The Light of Kahless.
Yeah, I would say a little more cling clang clang, because there's a lot more hand to hand combat than. But I guess you're right. That makes sense too. So,
all right. Well, before you do a summary, Black Alert. This is a spoiler for the back half of Star Trek Discovery Season 1, as well as, of course, the comic series Succession.
And if you've really read the comic, possible spoilers with Season 2. Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah. We'll talk about it.
If we go back to the MU, yeah.
Black Alert. Black Alert.
So Star Trek Discovery Succession is a sequel. That's what this is. And if I were to summarize the 4-issue miniseries, first off, it's a story about the story takes place entirely in the mirror universe. It deals with the mirror universe characters and the fallout of what happens when Emperor Georgiou has disappeared / died / gone away forever, and Lorca has been killed over, and just the entire universe. The mirror universe is in disarray, and it's the story of what happens to the Terran Empire and what is the fallout of the events from Discovery Season 1 in the mirror universe. So it starts with people learning of the actual fallout, and the person that has taken over the Shenzhou is Commander Detmer, and she has decided, you know what, I'm going to take over the ship and I'm going to run it because that's what Captain Burnham wanted me to do. So if you remember, last we left them in Season 1, that's where they were. So the Terran ship ISS Shenzhou is running around, and they're trying to find survivors after everything that happened in the mirror universe. And we go back to, this is cool, I didn't know this, San Francisco, which is the capital city of the Terran Empire. And there.
Yes, I love that. I love that we went back there.
And San Francisco, all I'm going to say is the Golden Gate Bridge has never looked better. With the flames of the Terran Empire and the insignia. But we find out what happens after an emperor falls in the mirrored universe, and there is no direct next of kin. So as you think with many kingdoms, and that's, I'm sure, how Terran Empire was designed, we find that there is a cousin named Lord Alexander to Mirror Burnham, and she's related to Georgiou. And once Georgiou is passed, Alexander takes over the kingdom, and he goes, you know what? I am now the emperor. I am going to run this universe the way I see fit. And then we go to Kronos, where there is the resistance building with Laurel and Amanda, Sarek's wife and Spock's mother. And it's just that we see how this resistance starts to build against an occupied Klingon empire who is being run by the Terran Empire. And that's where the story is set. And we eventually find that Lord Alexander, or Emperor Alexander, his goal is racial purity in the simplest sense of the word. He wants to cleanse the entire universe of all non-human species. And so he designs this gene toxin that he wants to spread across the universe, and essentially anybody who's not human will die upon getting in contact with it. So he sends off his ships on those with payloads of that gene toxin, and that's where we see again this, how the story connects from there to the Klingon Empire is that the first place that Lord Alexander wants to attack is Kronos. So we then go back to Kronos, where we see Mud, and Mud is kind of a nice guy in this. He's helping people out. He's trying to build the resistance, and while Mud is trying to get things together, a cloaked figure comes to him, and she says, "You know what? Hey, I'm going to need your help, Mud." And he goes, "Forget it." And as he tries to see who is under the mask is lifted, and it's Mirror Burnham. So for the first time, we see Mirror Michael Burnham, who we presume is dead from the season 1 Mirror Universe events, because she's nowhere to be found. And the story then transpires from what happens with this gene toxin to how Burnham comes back and takes over the Empire, how she defeats Alexander. And in short, what happens is Burnham gets together with the Klingon resistance. And together they formulate a plan, and they corner the Terran Empire to where they can get into strategically the palace, the Terran Empire capital palace. And while they're formulating this all along, on the ISS Shenzhou, get this, Detmer is killed. And not only is Detmer killed, everybody on the bridge is killed by Captain Arium. And Arium then gives us a little bit of a monologue where she goes, "All my life in this empire, people have always told me I'm less than human. F you all, I am going to take over the ship." And she takes over it. And she tells, nobody's going to tell me what I'm going to be anymore. And we eventually find that she's part of that Klingon resistance. And she has vowed her allegiance to them. And that's how the ship, which was at one point brought back to carry the payload of that gene toxin, is now circling around the universe. And while this B story is going on of Captain Arium, we then see how Michael Burnham has strategically gotten into that palace with the help of the Klingon resistance. And with the Klingon resistance, she has killed Lord Alexander, and she has become the Emperor. But that's where you'd think the series would end, because that's just good storytelling in 4 issues. And then you realize there is a whole 10 pages left. Well, you then find that the ISS Shenzhou has actually made it back to Earth. And while Michael Burnham is giving her speech as the new emperor, a toxin is released that kills all the humans on the planet. And while the humans fall, Captain Arium walks down from the ship, and she goes, "You know what? All along, people just kept telling me, you're not human, you're not human. Now there is nobody to tell me what I am or I amn't. I am your emperor." And she sits on the throne, and she goes from communications ensign Arium to Captain Arium of the Shenzhou to Emperor Arium. And if you didn't think that was enough storytelling and that wasn't worthy of goosebumps in itself, the final page of issue 4 starts with Captain's Log. And the Captain's Log reads, essentially summarizes what happens in the Empire in the last few months, where it says, in the last 4 months or 5 months, the Empire has changed 4 emperors. And as we zoom in on a ship from a distance, it keeps zooming into what the ship might be. And the log talks about how, in spite of all those changes, it's our duty as Starfleet to do our best to find some common ground, to try to find and establish diplomacy in this mirrored universe. And the final 2 dialogue bubbles as it zooms on the ship are, it's just all, as my first officer would say, fascinating. And then we see that it's the USS Enterprise, and that's where the series ends. So much to talk about here, Marty. What did you think about it, man? First thoughts.
I couldn't believe how quickly I read this series. It just flew by. I want more.
Yeah.
It was great. I loved the lead into the Mirror episode from TOS.
Yeah.
I love that they made Area.
Hang on. Just before you say anything else, you think that is what that is? You think that's a lead into the Mirror episode? You know what I think it is? And this is my theory. I could be wrong. I think it is Mirror Universe Enterprise with Mirror Universe Pike and Mirror Universe Spock.
Except for the fact that when Pike was in command, Spock was not the first officer.
Unless in this universe he is.
Unless in this universe he is.
Yeah. But what you say makes sense also. So
I took of this is that it was Captain Kirk speaking. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure.
Right.
If Mike Johnson was here, I'm sure he could tell us. But
yeah, he would give us all the spoilers.
Or he'd say season 2 spoilers and shrug. Yeah. We don't know.
But Mike, if you're listening, we need to know, man. We need to know. But go ahead. So initial thoughts, you read it really quickly, huh?
I did. I want to read it again. I love that Ariam was a major player in this series.
How good was that?
Because I've always wanted more from her in the show anyway, because she's such just her look alone is so interesting. Like, I wanted to know more about her, and now we finally do. So if you're an Ariam fan and you haven't read Star Trek Discovery Succession, get on it. Lots of Ariam in this series.
Yeah. She's kind of the big bad.
Yeah.
Who ends up becoming the hero of the story.
She is. And there's so much backstabbing in this. Great.
Yeah. It's almost like Game of Thrones meets Star Trek.
Yeah. It's very
kind of weird. Yeah.
Actually, and there's actually a panel that reminded me a lot of Game of Thrones when Alexander is just naked in bed with 2 women and he's holding this goblet of wine and he summons his servant and throws the wine. It was very reminded me a lot of I forgot his name. It's been so long since Game of Thrones has been on the air.
You know what I really appreciated is in this series, unlike Light of Kahless, art plays a major role, and artist Angel Hernandez knocks it out of the park. Like the way he shows architecture and scope, and like everything from tall buildings to like the tiniest of things, just so well done, and worthy artist for drawing this miniseries. But if anybody had any doubts about how important Ariam is to this, the regular cover. So usually, for those of you who don't know, comic books have regular covers, which are the covers that are sold mostly, and then they have
favorite cover. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and issue 3 is a close-up of Ariam. It's just her face, and in her eyes are, instead of her retina, is the insignia of the Terran Empire. And just Ariam kills, literally metaphorically, in this entire series.
If I had this with me in Las Vegas this year, I would have had the actress sign this. And I know she took a selfie with this too and posted it. So
oh really? Yeah. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that. I need to follow her and see what she thought of the story, because Ariam, I've always thought there is something very mysterious about Ariam, and I'm glad the people who made this book also thought that, because it
Well, it was
feels a
written by
lot
one of the writers of Discovery, so
right, and it feels a lot like, and I think that's very, very deliberate. It feels a lot like Burnham's story up until the very end when you realize, no,
it's
this is
Ariam's
actually
story. Yeah.
yeah, this is actually Ariam's story masquerading as Burnham's story. And that's never more apparent than when in issue 4, toward the end, they just kill Burnham. Like she just
Yep.
falls and she keels over and dies.
You're done.
Yeah, and you all the while you're expecting, I want to see what Michael Burnham in the mirrored universe looks like. What is Emperor Burnham going to look like? And then gone.
You get a whole 2 seconds of her.
Yeah, and then she just coughs up blood and just dies. And then you see as she falls over amidst the crowds of hundreds of thousands, you see Ariam going down, picking up Michael's throne and just putting it on herself. Picking up her.
She takes her
tiara.
helmet off first.
Yeah,
Throws
yeah.
to the ground, and there's this really great shot of her sitting on the throne, and you see what she looks like without her helmet, and it's really creepy. And
I feel like
perfect Terran Emperor.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's intentional, but she looks at in that last panel, right there, like she's almost crying. I want to say she looks like maybe she's crying, or she is like there's something she's feeling there. But just overall, just an incredible series, man. I don't know what we did to deserve such wonderful stories from the IDW people, but they just keep beating everything.
And like Light of Kahless, this story is completely in the Mirror universe, so we don't see any Federation characters at all.
Yeah,
only universe characters.
Yeah, and ironically, the only thing Federation we see is that last page, which I'm sure is a setup for
it's in the Mirror universe still. That's not even Federation.
Oh, right. Oh, you meant like regular universe, like our Prime Universe characters. Right. Yeah, that makes. Yeah, you're right. We don't see them in Light of Kahless, even though that takes place in the Prime Universe, and we don't see them here. And
completely isolated stories from.
Yeah. You could actually read the Light of Kahless without having season 1, and you'd still get a really good story out of it.
Yeah.
But for this, I would recommend that people watch season 1 a couple of times, right? So you really get all the intricacies.
Yeah, because you kind of have to know what's been going on in the Mirror universe prior to this storyline, which happens during season 1 of Discovery. So
I see we have a few different covers. So before we keep going into the depth of how much we love all the stories, they have a bunch of covers. And I'm guessing, like I saw that for number 4, you got a Lorca cover.
Yeah, I couldn't find the cover, the standard cover. So I got the Lorca cover for that one.
So I got the standard cover. And that's the standard
that one,
cover.
yeah.
And so for those of you who are listening, it looks like for every issue they made 4 covers. Yeah, there's a regular.
I love the ones that all have a ship on them.
Yeah,
and they did the same thing for Light of Kahless. There's one cover that has a ship for every cover, and I wish I could find those covers.
And I'm sure if you talk to your local comic book store, they could get it for you.
Yeah.
But they also did this cool thing. They did a photo cover, which correct me if I'm wrong, they're all like portraits of the Mirror Universe characters, like the main characters.
They're screenshots from the show, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like issue 1 is a photo cover of Michael Burnham. Then issue 2 is Georgiou, and issue 3 is
Michael Burnham again.
And issue 4 is Lorca.
Even though Lorca's not even in this series except for the first page.
Yeah, the first scene, and then he's gone.
Speaking of that, I love how each issue started with a flashback. A little page flashback.
Mm-hmm. Again, they did a turn from Light of Kahless where each issue starts in the present and then the whole thing is a flashback. Here it starts with the flashback and the whole thing is the present.
Really, really good how they did that.
Hey, what did you think of the writing overall?
I thought it was great. I thought the writing tied in a lot more to the arts in this one. You can tell that the writers just had a lot of fun with this story.
How much Latinum, with continuing with our Ferengi theme, Marty, how much Latinum would you like to bet that when Bayer and Johnson were coming up with Lord Alexander, they're thinking of Donald Trump.
When they were coming up with who? Sorry?
Lord Alexander, the guy who wants to eliminate all non-humans and wants to bring in racial purity. And he wants to make...
I didn't make the connection until just now.
Yeah.
But I mean, that could have been something they were referencing. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to imagine that's what that is.
I would bet a few strips of gold plus platinum for that.
And I love the writing. It was really good. I really like how they told Ariam's story. I don't know what other character on the ship would have even fit the story so well, because when you see Ariam, you immediately feel sympathetic with the way she's designed, and she reminds me a little bit of Data, like in a way, because
a little bit, yeah. It's hard not to draw that comparison.
Yeah, and then you go from that to she's now the emperor of the mirror universe, and that's what I was referencing to earlier when I said possible season 2 spoilers. Now we know who the emperor is in the mirror universe. Maybe things have changed. Like, clearly things change every 5 minutes. I really think Mike Johnson and Kirsten Beyer, they really love Klingons, because in this story Klingons are again the good guys, and in Light of Kahless they are the good guys. I think that they really wanted us to know that Klingons are good people.
Yeah.
Yeah. In this story, you find that the Klingon Empire is under like terrible occupation and colonization by the humans, and just so many really good twists and turns. Very much, like I said, to me, it felt like a Game of Thrones episode in Star Trek, and
it wasn't it?
Yeah, and
Game of Thrones.
And in no point I didn't feel like there was anything missing. It was a really good Star Trek episode story. There is the whiz whiz bang bang. There is the what happened? No, there
was one thing missing that I would have liked to have seen.
Hit me.
Captain Killy.
Oh my God, yes. You know what I think?
Speaking of Captain Killy, I also think we need a series where we find out what she was up to when the Discoveries switched places.
Yeah, so she would have been in the Prime Universe.
Yep.
But
in this story, she would have been in the Mirror Universe.
Right, and because
unless her ship got destroyed by Klingons in the Prime Universe.
I would really pay good money, Marty, to see a story in which Ariam and Killy face off.
Oh, that'd be good. Maybe that's going to be the next one.
Yeah, and IDW people, if you're listening, hire me. But did you? I'm guessing you. Like I said, the art was great. This time, I didn't find a whole lot of the mythological epicness like I did with Light of Kahless. Light of Kahless felt again like a myth. This felt like a really good action story, like a lot of people dying and ships blasting up and places being shot down. Not taking away anything from the story. I just think it's like it's just a different story than Light of Kahless.
Very different, yes.
And so, who was your favorite character throughout the? You can't pick Ariam. Who is your favorite character throughout the miniseries?
I really liked Cornwell.
We haven't talked about her a whole lot, but she has a really good arc too. She swears allegiance to Lord Alexander, but clearly she has her own plans. She wants to be the emperor. Basically, if the series could be put in some funny terms, I would say it's like the musical chairs of who wants to be the Terran emperor. It's like, oh, he's the emperor. No, she's the emperor. No, she's the emperor. No, that is the emperor now. That's just how the story goes.
Yeah, and pretty crazy.
Yeah, Cornwell is pretty good. Did you enjoy all of the characters? Did you have any particular complaints about the story in any way?
I wish we had gone back to Mudd, because I thought he was really interesting in this universe, and I wanted to see more from him.
It's kind of unsettling to see Mudd being a nice guy. Like I don't know.
I know, but it intrigued me so much. I wanted to see more. I wanted to see more of that refugee camp. I wanted this whole storyline to be expanded, and maybe maybe into like 6 issues. Or an
And
ongoing series that never ends, you know?
yeah, I think the only obstacle to something like that would be the actual show wanting to return to the mirror universe.
Right, exactly.
So that's why they'd probably have to keep telling these stories. And they did that with Boldly Go. Boldly Go is the series that takes place after the events of Star Trek Beyond. And like the full volume 1 of that, the first 4 or 5 issues all take place on different ships. Like there's a ship called the USS Endeavour, and everybody's in different parts and they all converge, but it's not the Enterprise. So I think when they make these comics, CBS tells them, hey, make
Or
sure
Paramount in the case of
yeah. And they tell them, hey, make sure you don't take over too much of the storyline to where we might have to change things around.
It's probably very difficult to tell stories in these universes, especially with the ones with ongoing storylines like Discovery.
Were there any Easter eggs that you found? Something interesting that you found analogous to what's going on in Discovery?
I didn't pick up anything, but I was reading it so fast because the story was so engaging. What about you?
I picked up a couple of little things. Like I really like the one thing I really enjoyed was where we see a little more of the dynamic. It's not really an Easter egg, but a minor detail that's easy to miss. We actually get a little bit more of Emperor Georgiou, and we see her as a mother and someone who's trying to train.
When
Burnham.
she's informed that Burnham has died trying to capture Lorca.
Yeah,
and she just like, everybody out now, and she just kind of falls and weeps.
I certainly liked the sword fight that they have, Georgiou and a young Burnham.
Yep.
So my little thing that I noticed was like young Burnham looks awesome.
She does.
Like, I think they nailed that one.
The hair.
Yeah. And the set again. This is just again. I think like I did a big goodness. Look at that setting, man. Like on page 1. Like that's like the first 20 minutes of Wonder Woman right there.
I love that they use the Palace Gardens as from the Palace of the Fine Arts Theater, and they hung those Terran Emperor logos on the side of that.
One other, I guess I wouldn't call this an Easter egg again, just a minor detail that I thought was really cool, is in issue 2, Vogue is walking through Terran-occupied Kronos, and she comes up to a secret lair, a secret entrance, and the voice asks her, "What says Kahless?" And she says, "Remain Klingon." Like I thought that was just little details like that make me really, really joyful, because that's something that
there's a great little tie-in to the Light of Kahless series that they did.
Yeah, and like in the Prime universe, everybody says it like a war cry. It's interesting that in this universe, it's a secret code. That's something that people say in secret. That felt really good to me. So, Marty, favorite panels? What do you got, man?
I love the panel of the space station blowing up in issue 2. I guess I just like things that explode, because I also like the constellation, the nacelles being blown apart.
That's awesome.
Speaking of Constellation, the little Decker reference, Captain Decker, and didn't we talk about this in the Green Lantern episode?
Yep.
Captain Decker's ship just always seems to get screwed over.
I think that's a Mike Johnson thing. Now I'm convinced that's a Mike Johnson thing. He always finds Captain Decker and he always screws that thing over.
Yeah, it's so funny.
Again, that's a good catch, man. I completely forgot.
And then, of course, I love this multi-panel of everyone in the Palace of the Fine Arts dying. Horrible, painful death.
Yeah, and so here are a couple of panels that I really like, and it's weird that both of them are very Arium centric, but in comics there is a term called moment-to-moment transition, which shows you exactly what happens 1 second to the next when they draw something like that. So, for example, if you have 4 panels on a page and each of them is me picking up something from the table, it'll be panel 1, my hand gets closer to the gun. Panel 2, my hand grabs the gun. Panel 3, I pick it up, and that we see that. And panel 4 is me doing something with the gun. And that's called a moment-to-moment transition. In issue 1, there are 2 really good moment-to-moment transitions. The first one is this one, where we see what Ariam's doing, and it's the page where we see the Shenzhou again, and it starts to change course. And Detmer is talking to her crew like everything's normal, but in the meantime, we see Ariam's helmet, her breathable helmet, coming on.
Yeah, just kind of coming around and covering her face.
And then, sure
and then
enough,
you're like,
next
oh,
page,
something's going
everybody
to happen.
dies. Everybody suffocates to death. And the next one is just after that page is this a fixed camera shot of her walking up from the back to the front. And just another like really good minute detail. And I love how every time we see Ariam, we see something about her eyes. Like here you see her eyes, right? Like on that very page, you see her eyes. And then I think at the end of issue 3, you see her eyes again. But this time there is a DNA sequence in there, a string of DNA. Right here. The last page has, and it's like a...
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And
because she's
again,
looking at the
the
monitor.
end of issue 4, you zoom into not quite her eyes, but you get back to right there. And that's again, like you see there, again, it's her eyes.
And her eyes are non-existent in that.
Yeah.
Which means that something's changed in her.
When she takes off that helmet, oh yeah, there is a scene where she actually takes off her eyes. I forgot about that one. Like, see that panel? Like, yeah. And I think she's just,
throws them on the ground.
Done.
Yeah.
Like she's done. The entire eye setup was probably for the benefit of Starfleet and, or in this case, the Terran Empire. And I think the inference here is, I'm done. I'm going to look how I look, and people just have to deal with it. But overall, wonderful setup, incredible story. Both of them really good, really different comics. One of them's a myth, one of them's a Game of Thrones episode, but I enjoyed both of them. The twists and turns, we've spoiled all of them, or almost all of them. So if you haven't read it, I still think you'll enjoy it with the spoilers. And honestly, while I was doing the episode, I saw so much. I might, after recording, sit down and read the whole thing again because I enjoyed them so much.
Oh, really?
And this time I want to catch every piece of art. If you go back to our previous episode on ReadingTrek, where I got to do a guest interview with J.K. Woodward, he talks about how art is never appreciated enough. And he feels that way as the artist of Mirror Broken. And that story hinges on really good art, and he kills it with his art. But when I asked him, hey, what's one thing that you really feel like people should know when they're reading comics, he says, you can never look at the art enough. So from now on, I've made it a point to read every comic twice. But I've already read this twice.
Once for the story, once for the art.
Right. Once you get the story out of the way, you can sit and go, oh, that's what they were doing. Well, that's what they were trying to do. Like the little Decker reference. Like I'm sure you got that after a couple of rereads and getting through the story again. But overall, both really good stories. What does this get out of 5 stars from you, Marty?
This definitely gets like almost a full 5 stars. I'd say like 4.8.
Very cool. That's interesting. I have a little bit of a different reaction. I loved the story a lot, but I didn't like it quite as much as The Light of Kahless. I enjoyed that.
I guess I just like a little more whiz whiz bang bang in my comic.
And that's completely fair. That's what comics are made for. So I would give it a 4 star out of 5 stars. But I'm glad we both have our own favorites. I think overall, highly recommended. Go pick it up, trade paperback, digital issues, however you get it. See if you can get those photo covers. I think when you buy a paperback, you get all those covers anyway in the back.
Yeah, they're all included. Yeah.
So whatever works for you guys, we both recommend it. Yes? No?
Yep.
And go pick them up.
Both The Light of Kahless and Succession. 4-issue series each. Not a huge amount of reading, but they're both well worth picking up. And
both of them, after reading, now I really feel like I know a lot about season 1. I feel like I know a lot about season 1 that I never would have thought of. Like now I know where Tukuma got his armor, maybe how Vogue was born. I now know that. Who's going to be the Mirrored Universe captain? I know that. What happened to Michael Burnham in the Mirrored Universe? I know that. So just pick it up. It's just more enjoyment of the story.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts on any of these comic books, Shashank?
Go buy them, read them, and
go buy them.
Yeah, and tweet at us and tell us how much you enjoyed them, because we will write back.
Yes, please.
And how can, go ahead, Marty. Tell us how people can tweet at us.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on Light of Kahless and Succession. You can reach us on Twitter at ReadingTrek, online at readingtrek.thetricordertransmissions.com, where you can leave us a voice message by tapping on the bar on the side of the page, a new feature we added to the website.
Mm-hmm.
You can like our page on Facebook and leave us a message there. You can leave us an email at readingtrekpodcast@gmail.com. And please, if you enjoy the show, leave us a star rating and review on iTunes to help with our visibility. Shashank, how can people get a hold of you if they want to continue the conversation?
This is how much I'm into comics. My Twitter handle is @gutter_hero, GUTTER_HERO. Gutter is a comic book reference if you get it. And you can reach me there, or you can listen to another quirky, fun show I do with a wonderful human being named Barry DeFord on the Tricorder Transmissions called Polytreks. We examine politics and culture through the lens of Star Trek. We take real world incidents and compare them to movies and episodes from Star Trek or vice versa. So if you ever want to come by and listen to us there and see what other things we have to say, we do that there on Polytreks, and you can find Polytreks on @Polytreks on Twitter, same thing on Facebook. But me, @gutter_hero on Twitter. Find me, tweet at me, tell me how much you love this comics, and we'll exchange favorite panel discussions.
And you can find me on Twitter @TimeTravelMarty. I'm also on Facebook as a member of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group. And also, you can listen to my new show, Queer Treks, which is brand new on the Tricorder Transmissions Network. By the time this airs, episode 1 should be live in your feeds.
Tell us a little bit about Queer Trek, Marty.
Queer Trek is an LGBTQ Star Trek podcast, which will be influenced heavily by you. We will take submissions on our website at queertrek.thetricordertransmissions.com. You can submit your topic idea, or if you want to be a guest on the show and tell your story or talk about anything queer in relation to Star Trek, drop us a message. We'd be happy to have you on.
I am so excited for that show.
It's going to be good.
I'm glad that at the Tricorder Transmissions, there is a real initiative to find everyone and bring them into the Tricorder tribe. So
that's what we're all about, man.
Yeah. Just thank you again for having me. I don't know how long I can keep up this craziness with you and keep giving you content. But if you just shout out and say, hey, let's talk about a comic, there are 52 years worth of comics, buddy. It's
going to happen. We're going to do it all the time.
Just anytime you just let me know. You just open your communicator and give me a shout and I will transport right away, bud.
All right. Well, with that, once again, if you enjoyed the show, you can become a patron at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. And with that, Captain Picard wants us to let him read in peace.
I will leave you now to your book.
That is all I ask.
You can reach us on Twitter at ReadingTrek. Oh my God, there's a giant bug in my room right now. Ah!